Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We are winding down Season 2 on Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Season 2, once again, has been sponsored anonymously. L'zecha Nishmas, Rav Moshe Chaim ben Rav Yitzchak David, and we thank our sponsor. Today, we're going to be discussing, Rav Chaim has been well known, it's well documented, the tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of questions that Rav Chaim answered b'chsav. And there are Seforim, people have private letters. It's English higher, something which is unprecedented in modern history, the amount of questions that he answered. And Rav Chaim himself was asked, why did he spend so much time answering questions? Why did he spend more time writing his Chiburim? So Rabbi Brut's going to talk about this a little bit. I'm sure he's going to find something new, and as he always does, find something that's sourced until ultimately he's going to get to a Yisoid from Reb Chaim Volozhiner that perhaps Reb Chaim Kanievsky was basing some of what he was doing on. So, Rabbi Brut, how are you today? And we're looking forward.
Baruch Hashem. Okay, so basically the last few episodes we've been discussing the Derech Emunah, some more aspects of Derech Emunah, which is we're focusing on a concept known as Reb Chaim Kanievsky himself coins it a Likut Sefer. So we discussed various different aspects of Likut Seforim throughout the ages. Avada, there's much more to discuss. We spent 2 episodes dealing with a little different aspects of it, and then the third episode, moving away from Likut Seforim, but then ultimately getting back to Likut Seforim, we started talking about how Chaim Kanievsky writes all over that he's not a Paisik, it's not a Halacha L'Maisa. So we spoke about listing other Gedolim that also went with such a mahalach and said that they're not writing it as a Halacha L'Maisa, they're just writing it down stam. But in the end, ultimately, all those different Seforim, from the Shach, the Megadim, the Nesivis, and others, they ended up becoming, as we know, the key Seforim in the world of halacha. So Chaim Kanievsky, similarly, that's really what ultimately happens. He's screaming that the Derech Emunah is not halacha l'maisa, but today already it's considered halacha l'maisa sefer. And in that we got into a whole discussion with the Marsham about the Marsham. Some people were upset about the Marsham, but ultimately also the Marsham becomes we listed a whole bunch of gedolim, unbelievable sefer in the world of halacha. Now, what's negeya for us today, and to fine tune some of the aspects, is as follows. Number one is that when I'm saying in the past few episodes that Chaim Kanievsky is calling his sefer a Likut sefer, I'm chas v'shalom not calling. I don't think that it is. Chaim Kanievsky calls it a Likut sefer, and then I show that Chaim Kanievsky his yachas to Likut Seforim, but ultimately, and I showed that the Mishnah Berurah also called his own chibur a Likut sefer. Both of these Seforim are mali v'gadish, filled with chedushim. Anyone knows, when you open up Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Derech Emunah and you look at the Bir Allah on the side, how he goes through the sugya, bringing down everything, and how he's mechadish so many different things, as he's being malak at things, but he's being mechadish, he's holding in the sugya, is unbelievable. And so I'm not coming to call it a Likut Sefer. I'm going light how he says such a thing. Now, what's significant is that there were that relates to, let's say, the Marsham. Marsham is a Likut. It's a Likut of Ladam Marmakaimis, but it's more than that. It's also, we find his own voice in the Sefer. Meaning to say, there's which is something that I mentioned briefly, is that there are Likut Seforim that are just malakit. They just quote. Sometimes they don't even say what they say. Sometimes they'll just say Ayin Shach. Sometimes they'll say the Shach says it's Asr. Whereas there's others that they engage in the material that they're quoting very bekitzer. Such a sefer will be the Marsham. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the Mishnah Berurah are also similar in that aspect. So there's obviously multiple different meanings to the word Likut. Anyway, so just to bring this out further, is I quoted that Lamashal, the Stipler, who was also into certain Likut Seforim, amongst them the Marsham, one of the Likut Seforim the Stipler was into was the Derech Chaim of the Nesivis. So this is I've already mentioned a few times, and Amir Tzashem, I hope very soon to release it, especially now, is that the Nesivis, we devoted a whole episode to Nesivis, and one of the aspects we dealt with is the Nesivis is Chibur Kol Derech Chaim. The Stipler said that it was known, Rabbanim in Europe, before he got a job, he made sure to get a Derech Chaim. What's the point? The point is a Rav sometimes is in a situation, he cannot open up all the Seforim, and he's in a situation during davening mostly, so he doesn't know what to do. So Derech Chaim made a sefer, a handbook, a rabbi's handbook, so to speak. So I spoke out then, bringing that it became it became beyond popular. It's probably even impossible to calculate how many times it was published, because it was published in numerous Sidurim, and immediately it was. But the point is, it was looked, even though the R Chaim writes in Zagdama, here he does not write what he writes in other chiburim of his that's not halacha l'maisa. Here he is willing to assume that it's halacha l'maisa, but he just says, I'm not really being mechadish, I'm being melaked from, and he lists the Gedolei Achronim such as Magen Avram and El Yerab and others. But the point is, at the end of the day, this is telling you what to do, because I'm in a bind. I don't have time to learn the sugya. I'm a rabbi. A guy comes asking me a question in the middle of davening. What do? I look at my Dar Chaim, found my siddur. And Lamaisa, this is how it became accepted, the Sefer. Just as one Maharamakam, anyone opens up the Mishnah Berurah's Hagdama, Mishnah Berurah says, Dar Chaim, he includes it as one of the things that he's adding into his Chibur, and you learn through Mishnah Berurah, you see how many multiple times he's quoting the Nesivis in Dar Chaim. So I found it very interesting is this week I came across on a forum that someone brought up. He found this major Maharamakam, Reb Shlomo Eger, son of Reb Akiva Eger, a great Paisik, has a tshuva in Yerideh, Simon Mem Zayin. There was some question about something in Hilchos Avelis, and the Rav Paskin based on a Der Chaim, the Chavos Das and the Siddur, based on El Yerabba, and he wanted to show that it's El Yerabba and the Nesivis. We have two Paiskim passing like this. So Rav Shlomo Eger says, no, Ein Litzarev Das Hagoyin Chavos Das B'Siddur Shol Paisik. Don't count him as a Paisik. Ki Yuzal Ba'ashmei Loi Kasad Varv La'alacha. It's not La'alacha. V'loi Ayin V'dik B'Kol Din V'Din Midvar B'Rav M'Kaimis Ach Liket V'Rasham L'Maskeres Leir HaMeira. He wrote it L'Maskeres to be Ma'ira the Meira. V'im Hevi Das El Yerabba Adayin Lo Yechriya K'Maisa. It's not pshat that the Nesivis is telling you that the psak is like the El Yerabba. Then he says, you have to be minded to the sugya. So this sounds like this is a fascinating tshuva from Shlomo Eger, where he seems to be saying that no, it's not. You say all the people, everyone that's using the Der Chaim and they're putting in the Siddur, it's not Achra, which is very hard to understand. And someone over there on this forum tries to explain what does Rosh Hashanah mean, but the problem is more than that. What I spoke about in this episode on the Nesivis is the Rebbe Akiva Eger, besides being a close friend and giving an unbelievable haskama to the Nesivis' work, Der Chaim, he also writes hundreds of ha'aris on, and he's mityaches with it as halacha d'kachibur. So yes, it could be, and this is a complex discussion in halacha, but when you have nothing else in front of you, and this is what you have, the nesivis, and you're a rav, and someone asks you the shaila, and you're relying on the nesivis, you're good to go. Anyway, so the point is, here we have, again, the Likut Sefer, and we have that it's not clear what the kavana of the Nesivos. We seem to think that it, and as I said, the Mishnah Berurah thinks, the Stipler and others, that it's a psak halacha sefer to rely on, whereas Rosh Hashanah is saying, no, it's not, don't be mitzaref it, it's just to make ma'ir a rav, that the rav should go check the El Yerab, maybe the El Yerab says it, maybe he doesn't, and as I'm showing, Rabbi Akiva Eger seems to hold not like his son. Anyway, this is a complex discussion, and there's a lot more to fine-tune about it, but not for now. But the point is that there's a concept of Likut Seforim, and as I said, Likut Seforim, there's multiple levels of Likut Seforim. There are Likut Seforim that are mechadish plenty when they're being malakit, such as the Derech Hamunah and Mishnah Berurah. Now, but there's a more general point, which is how is the author there's the intention of the author, and then there's the intention of what ends up happening. So here, let's say we have again Rosh Hashanah saying the Nesivos he didn't really intend it to be, and it ends up getting a life of its own. So now we what we spoke about already start to talk about how's Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim says, I'm not a Paisik, but what do you mean? You are a Paisik. So now we have a crazy amount of literature to point to. Forget about that he says by the Derech Hamunah that I'm not a Paisik. We know that he wrote, it seems, for years and years, possibly answering between 80 tshuvas a day, and these tshuvas had sometimes 7-8 questions, to maybe even 120 questions a day. For years and years. I mean, I don't even know if they know the exact year when it started. I mean, I guess they could pinpoint when it started, but they don't know to when it started becoming crazy amounts of letters. But basically, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of letters. So now, what's going on in these letters? So that's obviously a question. So if people are asking him, which there were plenty of times, they're just asking him a simple question, not a halachic question, asking where's the Gemara. Many times these questions are, where's the Chazal? They saw brought down B'Shem Chazal, and Chaim Kanievsky with his crazy Bekiah tells you something. Okay, but we know today, because so many Seforim that are published have these letters, and not only that, a lot of these letters have been published by themselves, and we'll discuss more about fine-tuning all the different works that are out there of these letters, but there's plenty of halacha. They ask him different questions straight up in halacha, so much so that a bunch of years ago, it's already it must be almost 15 years ago, maybe even a little longer, it seems he kept a copy of the letters. So they decided, let's make a volume, al pi the Seder Shulchan Aruch, and al pi topics of the letters. So they collected the letters, and they started doing it from the beginning of Shulchan Aruch R Chaim. They skipped, let's say, Mezuzah. They put out this massive work, and the point was they have a team of people going through it, to writing biurim on it. Someone's funding this project. It's done by the family of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he authorized in the beginning, and he was involved with many different aspects of it. And we'll discuss what it is that he's involved with. But the point is, these are questions straight up revolving Shulchan Aruch R Chaim, and we know that the questions go everywhere. They're on Dalech Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. So again, he's answering someone. What does that mean? Is he answering you? It's halacha l'maisa. He's just telling you, oh, you want to know Yediyah? You're asking me Mishnah Berurah. Here's Yediyah Mishnah Berurah. It doesn't mean halacha l'maisa. Now, l'maisa, as I said, we will find two different aspects of it, but there are so many volumes of literature that this relates to. Now, some of the letters that have been published in recent years are just letters and learning, and some of these volumes are incredible. There's 2 volumes of letters between him and Dov Landau, which we'll discuss more soon enough. Rabbi Victor Neventhal is a whole volume of letters, mind-boggling what's going on in these letters. Interesting, at one point they published in his lifetime a volume called Igrei Suksavim, which they collected tons of materials that he wrote to let's say, sometimes he gave episaskama to certain Seforim, a lot of letters that they got, and it looks like a regular Tshuva Sefer. It's not like some people we're used to. What's Reb Chaim Kanievsky's thing? You'll say Kain, Loi, Ulai. If you're in Bnei Brak, come in. There's these one word answers. In this volume, which is it's called Igrei Suksavim Derech Hamuna, there's real letters. Some of them could be more than a page about specific things. They collected them from all different places. They have letters with him and Rabbi Yashiv, dozens of letters, real letters. So there are all types of letters, as I'm saying, and we will discuss more the different types of letters. Now, one of the things that's cute about these letters is, recently, I've mentioned many times, is that there's auctions, Seforim auctions that take place weekly, daily sometimes, and already for years, different letters of Reb Chaim Kanievsky go on auction. They don't go for so much money. Obviously, you hope to have a letter that has good content that maybe then it will be exciting.
We mentioned auctions. There was some news item recently that Reb Chaim's Becher or Stender was auctioned off for $2 million. Do you have any recollection? So
they in the auctions, they also auction off articles of clothes and stenders, and this took place even right in the middle of the Shloshim. They sold his stender for something like $1 million, a private auction. There's different auctions. Some of them we don't even know about. We just find out afterwards, and they're exorbitant sums of money. Sometimes, and the articles of clothes also of his and stuff like that. I'm not getting into that. Actually, there's a whole conversation behind why they do it, because in the Hasidic world they very much do it. But they did it for Rabbi Yashiv. The go-kart that used to take Rabbi Yashiv from his house to his shul, they auctioned it off and went on auction. And it's known they auctioned off and they sold the glasses of the Chazon Ish. So this is a common thing in the Litvisher world also. Litvaks can no longer make fun of Hasidim, that the Hasidim also, that do it, only did it, Litvaks also do it. Okay, obviously the question is who's buying it. It could be it's Hasidim that are buying it of these Litvaks, and maybe that's a different discussion also. Anyway, but the point is, these letters of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, so they've auctioned off, L'mashal, the Shoina Halachas. The Ksav Yad of Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shoina Halachas has already been sold on auction. Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Hagoyis and Gans Yerushalmi has been sold. I believe Rabbi Friedman, the famous Hershey Friedman bought it and has it. I think I saw a picture in a Mishpacha magazine article about him with it on display in his library. Now, what's fascinating is it's scanned available for the public at Hebrew University, nonetheless, library. You could look at it online. All that guys are Chaim Kanievsky and Gans Yerushalmi. So it's not sometimes, and I've said this in the past, I think, and I'm always very upset. Sometimes you find these auctions unbelievable discoveries, and then someone buys it and he keeps it in his house. He doesn't want anyone to know about it. Here, no, I must say the Yerushalmi, the guys are Chaim Kanievsky Yerushalmi are accessible to people. So now, letters also, they've been going up on auction even when he was alive. So randomly, from time to time, I check auctions for multiple reasons, not important for right now why, but Chaim Kanievsky, some letters I come across, just to mention the types of letters that he gets. Someone asked Chaim Kanievsky, and this is going on auction, I believe, in a few days. Is it true that the Stipler said you cannot learn Mishnayos with Perish Kehati? And the guy writes, he heard two reasons. One is because of Amelis V'Torah, and two, Bishum Hashkafas Psulais Shalom Mechaber. This is a fascinating question. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Loi Shamati Das HaStipler, Aval Pashach Ein L'Shtamish Boi. Then he says, Ayin Mai Katan Yud Zayin Amid Aleph. What's it referring to? So it's referring to over there, the Gemara says, Marav Doimel Malach Hashem Tzvaka is Yilmud Torah B'Piu V'im Lav Al Yilmudu. Okay, very interesting. It will be interesting is if that was the only letter we have, but they also auction off, and they don't make the connection, another letter. And this letter is as follows. Could someone learn the Seforim of Saul Leiberman, Tosefta Kapshuta? Could someone buy Seforim from the Beis Medrash, from JTS Beis Medrash Rabbanim? They put out many different Seforim. Yimasayel Dvar Avera. Vaz Dr. Chaim Kanievsky. So he says, there's no Isser to learn the Seforim of Tosefta Kapshuta. Beis Medrash Rabbanim, he says, no, it's not. It's it seems that he holds it's not a problem to buy Seforim from them. So actually, I think in this one he says he's not sure, but the Tosefta Kapshuta, he says you could use it. What's fascinating is in the Archas Rabbeinu, the Stipler was asked, could you use? You have to understand, Chaim Kanievsky and Shaul Lieberman, and they're all family. And if you remember the first episode, I rather said how Shaul Lieberman wrote Galus about Reb Chaim Kanievsky, so maybe that's why Reb Chaim Kanievsky is nice about it. But anyway, the point is, Chas v'Shalom, but the point is that Archas Rabbeinu, he was asked, Stipler was asked, could you look at the Yerushalmi Kipshutai, which you have to understand, the significance of Yerushalmi Kipshutai is way before Shaul Lieberman had anything to do with the conservatives. This is when he's learning in Mesorah, he's learning Yerushalayim, head of Mechon Harry official, no problems. Stipler says, no, you shouldn't look at it. So here we have a letter written from Reb Chaim Kanievsky, it's dated. It's in the 90s, I believe it is. And so this letter is also going on auction. So you see, it's mind-boggling. We're talking about a person that's writing 120 letters a day or something. What you could probably find them is mind-blowing. Okay, the point is like this. And we'll discuss more, some interesting questions, but obviously I do not plan on giving 50 episodes just to mention all the different Geschmacka questions that people ask. I just randomly came across them to bring out a point. Now, but this is a question that was discussed while Reb Chaim Kanievsky was alive. I used to always hear people talk about it during his Levaya, afterwards, and during his Speidim, I heard about it. I also used to complain about it, which is as follows. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I just said, he's writing a crazy amount of questions. He's answering a crazy amount of questions. He had a special room to do it. He did it al pi Kayin Levi Yisrael. He had a system, how he figured it out. Obviously, he couldn't know always. It takes time. This is not even Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I'm not saying he has to open up his library. The point was actually fascinating. Reb Chaim Kanievsky he did it off the cuff, but still it takes time to answer people. He's doing it by pen. He's not dictating it to people. So the question that I asked and many people asked is, why is it so important to answer these questions, especially if you look at a lot of the questions are not such significant questions you can ask any learned person, they can answer. It's not like they're asking the most complex questions. Okay, that's what we understand. We need Reb Chaim Kanievsky for. So the question that was asked is, Reb Chaim Kanievsky had so many more Seforim to write. We know he began writing on Kachim. It could be that he even would have done on Tyrus. Instead, the volume on Kachim is tiny. And so people complain. These questions, he spent hours a day on it, took away from what we, Klal Yisrael, would have been Zaycha to have this monumental work on Kachim and perhaps even on Tyrus. So how did Reb Chaim Kanievsky justify answering every Tom, Dick, and Harry that asked him a question, and he answered them? What's going on? So what's fascinating about Reb Chaim Kanievsky is that one does not have to speculate. People have asked him every single question, including this. Many people had this conversation with him. They asked him, what's going on? How could you justify doing this. It's coming at the expense of other Seforim. So Lamashal, the famous person that we've discussed already numerous times, which we hope to have him on the podcast, is Rabbi Uri Tiger, who was able to have a special relationship with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He too asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky about it at different times. In one of his Seforim, he has a whole footnote about it, discussing what's going on. And Lamaisa, it seems Reb Chaim Kanievsky gave him different times, different answers. One is that it's al Tzachiv, Reb Chaim Kanievsky didn't have Talmidim. He wasn't a Rosh Yeshiva. It seems he might have been a Rosh Yeshiva for a Rebbe for a day, and the type of Saul wasn't working, so he took him away from it. So the point was, this was a form of Arbatzas HaTorah for him, because we know V'shinantam Levanecha, Elu Talmidim. So this was some type of Muslim. By answering letters, he's being educating Klal Yisrael. Okay, so there is an aspect to that Nakuda, but and this is something that we will have to discuss at a later point in time. The whole concept of writing a Sefer, one of the milas that Gedolim point out is that you're becoming a Rebbe for Klal Yisrael for Dairis. I mean, say you could give a shir, especially this is in the days before it could be recorded. Obviously, the recording changes a lot in this conversation. But if let's say someone's giving a shir on Shabbos, so it's very important giving a shir. But writing something down has a kiyum la'olam. So Chaim Kanievsky still held that there's some aspect of being malamed to Talmidim. Another answer is it gave the sender a nakuda to be mashki and learning. It helped them, and the last answer, which is an answer which we'll deal with also, is sort of a rachmanis. He knew that the people who send it to him, they're waiting to hear from him, and they want to get the answer, and it helps them. A young bacher, all of a sudden has some question, whatever it is. He maybe even try to ask a few different people. All of a sudden, he gets an answer from Chaim Kanievsky. He's all besimcha. So it's sort of like a chesed nakuda that Chaim Kanievsky was doing by answering all these people. So my intent is to try to deal. We're going to try to explain and enlighten some of these aspects. So first of all, there's a general question, and this question is like this. Do we find other Gedolim that they had to sacrifice their Seforim for their job, so to speak, or for others? Maybe they want to write a certain thing and then they have to write something else. So there's definitely precedent for this. Just to mention two examples that come to mind. One is Rosh Hashanah Zalman Auerbach. Rosh Hashanah Zalman Auerbach was a guy in Olam. He was sitting and learning in a Kehila, learning Zraim for, I think it was something like 19 years after he was married, plugging away, being prolific, publishing stuff. He already published a few volumes, and then he gets the offer to become a Rosh Yeshiva called Torah. So he had a major suffix because he had in his head already material for many more volumes in Zram, but he needs time to write. You can have a lot of times you can have material, but you got to have time and the funding to write it. He knew that if he becomes a Rosh Yeshiva, it's a whole different track. He's not going to have the ability to write these Seforim. So he had a shaila, and he asked, and he was told, no, you should give it. You should dafka become. Yes, Klal Yisrael is going to lose out those Seforim on. Let's say he was working on Trumas at the time, the rest of Trumas and some other volumes in Zram. But it's more important for you to become and less known in America. We don't focus this much on Rosh Hashanah because we know Rosh Hashanah as the Paisik, but basically he was a Maggid Shir, first year base Medrash for years and years. He had thousands of Talmidim over the years. He was an excellent Maggid Shir. Excellent, in depending on how different people define it. He gave excellent shir, very important shir, and he was mechanech thousands and thousands of talmidim. But l'maisa nachal, he still remained the paisik of in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, in the world at large, a incredible paisik that already when he was in his low 20s. This is what they realized it was going to be the future. Gedolim were writing about him like in such glowing terms. So it ended up basically that he became both. Just we did lose out on some of these volumes. Another person was the Malbim. The Malbim was a great guy, and he started working on a Chibur on R Chaim, which is one of the most mind-boggling works on R Chaim, known as Artzas Hachaim. It didn't get too far. Basically, as a battling of the Maskilim, he ended up spending the rest of his life to write a systematic Be'indik Pirish, defending Torah Shebal Peh in his work Al Torah, which deals with a Pirish of Midrashi Halacha, and then moving further on to writing a Pirish on Gans Nach Be'iyun. And you needed someone with the greatness of the Malbim, such a tremendous Talmud Chacham. And some people said it's a shame we lost out. Klal Yisrael lost out the Artzas Hachaim and Rest of Shulchan Aruch. But it's very possible, and this is what's been claimed, that we would not have had a Malbim Makam of the Malbim stature to be able to put out a Malbim type of work on Tanakh. So we needed it. Okay, so the point is, sometimes Adam Gadol is faced with a situation and what to do. So here Reb Chaim Kanievsky shots up that this is what he's supposed to be doing. That he's supposed to be doing this for people. Okay, now Lamaisa, and so just two issues to discuss that I would like to discuss over here. First, there's like this: a Rav. What's the story with a Rav gets a question? Okay, which is very common. Rabbanim today get emails. Some Rabbanim are tech savvy more and more. They the WhatsApp groups or all different things. They get questions nonstop. So the question is, what's their chiyuv as a Rav? I'm not talking about for their salary. I'm talking more about their chiyuv al Rav. So interestingly enough, I quoted this in the past, that there's a fascinating small kuntres that Rosh Dablitsky wrote over 50 years ago of different things that a Rav should know. So one of the things is like this. He brings down, he tells to, it's a mechilta, it's also a mesechtes smachos, which basically there was a discussion. These two people, Reb Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shmuel, were being taken out to be killed. They were crying. It was a whole discussion, and basically the question was, they were trying to figure out what did they do wrong, and it sounded like one of them maybe Shama besuda hayayishiv v'yashin uva ishal shal al nidasa al tayr shala v'amar la shamish yashinhu v'atayr amar im aneh maksiv v'ragti eschem becharav. So much so that this, according to this early Mechilta, and as I said, it's also Masechtas Smachos and other places, it sounds like that a Rav has to be available all times to answer questions. I went to sleep, it doesn't help. A phone, it has to be available. You can't have a blocked phone number. This is what Rosh Dablitsky writes. Now, obviously, the question is, what's the Hagdara of this? Does a Rav need to be available 24/7? So it's not simple. But he says, when you read Gedolim books, this is what Rosh Dablitsky says, you sometimes find that certain Gedolim had set times that they weren't available. So he says that's not so simple. But Lamaisa, we do find that there were Gedolim that did have, just to mention two Makairis about this. Number one is Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Back to Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, as I said, he was very, very accessible all the years. But at a certain point in time later on in life, he locked himself up for about 2 hours a day. What was he doing? He basically realized that the Shmir Shabbos Kolchasa is a classic. It's becoming used thousands of times a week by all of Klal Yisrael. So he decided to go through the Sefer again to check over that everything that was said in his name was his, and Bechlal to look it over, and he didn't want to be interrupted during this period of time. So it was known you couldn't interrupt him during this period of time. On the other hand, I heard one time I was talking to a Rav, and the Rav was complaining to me he doesn't have time to prepare shir. So I said, why don't you just take the phone off the hook, whatever, a few hours in your week or something, and prepare shir then, and the rest of the time you'll be accessible. So he told me, this Rav said like this, he has a Kabbalah from Ramosha. Ramosha basically from when he woke up till when he went to sleep, sat by the phone to be accessible. And everyone who knows, I wasn't saying to know such a thing, but basically from Ramosha, so to speak, opened up shop till Saif Yamav, he was always available to answer questions. He answered everything, the most complex questions on the spot. He was completely available. This is similar based on this Makar, possibly taking this Masechtas Machos out of Saif. Now, interestingly enough, this is Rosh Dablitsky I'm saying is bringing this up, but what about other Gedolim? Do they handle such a thing? So I come across that I mentioned last week, we were talking about the Marsham, the greatness of the Marsham. So the Marsham, to put in perspective, is a Galicianer Goyim. So the Aderet, after Rabbi Yitzchak Khan Inspector dies, he puts who's his Meira, the Gadol's Gadol is going to be the Marsham. So he writes a tshuva to him. Now, just you have to understand, this is how he refers to the Marsham in this tshuva. L'chvayid hagoyin hagadol, Charuf ubaki b'chol chedrei Torah, Meirenu Shalom, Mordechai HaKohen Shlita, Baal Sefer Mishpat Shalom, and then he writes him a whole question. This is in Man Elio. Now, in Marsham, in Chuvas Marsham, we find the tshuva that he asked the Marsham. One of the chuvas that he asked him involved this type of thing, which he brought up, Grada, this Masechtas Machos, and he wanted to know, as a Rav, is he mechuyev Adasayf? And it seems that the Marsham said, it's a midas chasidus. It's not clear to how exact fine tune it when, because the pashtus is it's some type of taina. When you learn Masechtas Machas al pshat, and as I said, Rosh Lutzki is taking it to be like that. But if you take this to be out of saif, you're pretty much making it impossible to be a rav, because a rav to be so accessible, so every second of his day, it's basically impossible. Now, interestingly enough, just to mention relating to this, similar with Aderet, is that Aderet. So he left behind millions of ksavim. One of the things he left behind was incredible autobiography. In this autobiography, he writes, basically the town was not paying him the salary. This was a constant problem for Rabbanim in general, and the Aderet suffered from this greatly. So he didn't know what to do. So he asked the advice, and basically the Gadol Hadar, he says, L'zaken Gedoyle Hadar Hagoyin Mikavna answered him, there's no problem. Do not answer them their questions until your salary is paid. And then he says, so there is such a concept. If you're not getting paid, then there's at least that for the Rav. So if the Rav's getting paid, so now the question might be, what's the salary? What's included in the salary? Okay. Anyway, we're not going to. I don't know Hilchos Rabbanim, and we'll let the Rabbanim give a share about that. Okay. Now, the last nakuda for today that I like to bring out is relating to understanding Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Where is this coming from? Akadekach, this tremendous nakuda of chesed that we are seeing illustrated over here in this action. We're talking about spending multiple hours daily, every day, for years and years. And this man had what to do with his time, as they say. So what's the pshat? I'm gonna bring out two total different types of mahalchim, if there's time. For sure, one, we'll see if we have time for the second. Number one is like this. So a lot of times, when I prepare these shiurim, I have no idea what am I going to say. And as they say, it's pashat siyata shmaya. All of a sudden, I'm thinking things, walking randomly, a thing that I'm working on, something else could come to light, and all of a sudden put things together from different topics. Sometimes I'm like blown away how this even happens. And if you speak to anyone that has to prepare a shir, this happens to them also. So a few weeks ago, I gave over a chabura in shul about Gedolim books. A topic that I've collected material for close to, I've been reading Gedolim books for close to 40 years, and I've had a massive amount of material about it. So I said, I'll start. In order for me to talk about a topic, if I talk about a topic, that helps me start to being able to write, get my ideas in order. So I was working on it. So I was telling over a friend of mine, there's some of the nakudas that I said. I was talking to a friend of mine, Moshe Habner, and all of a sudden, what I said then, all of a sudden I realized that's going to help me over here, because I had this kasha on Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, how could you spend so much time answering people? Spend an hour a day. The amount of hours that he was spending on it, we lost Klal Yisrael. There's no replacement, if you notice, just to point this out, there's no Mishnah Berurah type sefer on Yeridea, Chayshe Mishpat. And forget about when you get to Kachim and Tyrus. Who could have done Kachim and Tyrus? The person who did Zram, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. There's going to be many different ones. Look, I mentioned this. There's dozens of Mishnah Berurah like Seforim, but with the person like Reb Chaim Kanievsky behind it, I'm not too confident. So I'm bothered. Now. So I'm talking to this friend of mine, Moshe Habner. I'm saying over what I said in the shir about Gedolim books, and then it comes in the conversation. I remember a conversation I had with someone else about Reb Chaim Volozhiner. We were having a whole conversation about the Vilna Gaon and Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And in the course of that conversation, I was saying again something that bothered me. Again, it bothers me. It doesn't mean it bothers anyone. It doesn't mean it's a question. It doesn't mean anything. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, we know, was a Gaon Olam. He founds Volozhin. He's a Talmud Muvik, the Vilna Gaon. He's a Gaon in Halacha. He's a Gaon in Makubal and everything. He doesn't publish anything. He left behind his Chuvas, which ends up in 3 different fires getting destroyed. He left behind the work on Avis, which some of it survives, and he leaves behind this work called Nefesh Hachaim. Now, he's on his deathbed already, and you would think, and this is very sad, we're talking about the Talmud Muvik of the Vilna Gaon. We barely have any of his Torah left behind. We have something like 17 Shuvas of his. We have in the Nachas David on the Sugya of Halach and Mahalach of his, but we don't have his Torah. So you would think on his deathbed, what's he going to say? He's talking to his son, Rabbi Yitzchak Volozhiner, the person who takes over to be the Rosh Hashiva, another great Gaon. He's going to tell him, please publish some of my ksavim, publish my chuvas. It's going to change. We're talking about the Reb Chaim Volozhiner. It's going to become a pecha in the world of halacha, if my chuvas, and we know he had dozens and dozens of chuvas, he was consulted for complex shailas, aguna shailas, and all different complicated things. So it could have changed the world of halacha. Chaim Volozhiner's Tzibur. What does he tell him? No, print my Sefer Nefesh Hachaim. Lamaisa, what happens? He doesn't print it right away. He has a fire, he has a death, and basically he realizes that he takes it, that what did he do wrong? He didn't listen to his father to publish a Nefesh Hachaim right away. So he goes ahead and publishes a Nefesh Hachaim. So first I had as a fascinating thing was that here you see that Chaim Volozhiner held that this is the most important of his works to make sure to be published was the Nefesh Hachaim. Okay, so obviously someone has to be ayin hativ in what's going on in the Nefesh Hachaim that was so important for Chaim Volozhiner that he held this should be his lasting legacy. But more than that, in this introduction, he tells his son something else, and this is written by Rebitzel Volozhiner, Rosh Hashiva Volozhin. Kol adam loy la'atzmai nivra. Every person is not created for themselves. Rak lahayil lachrini. Kichol asher yimtze b'koychay lasos. Whatever you could do for the other person, that's what you were created to do. Now, if I said this sentence and I told you some Baal Musar said it, okay, but say that. Here we have Talmud Muvik of the Vilna Gaon is talking about a nakuda. What is the point of everything? Kol adam loy la'atzmai nivra. Unbelievable that this is the legacy that Chaim Volozhiner on his deathbed, and it seems he would say this Keseder, is telling Rebitzel Volozhiner, this is what it's about. So now, I'm looking at it. So now it's starting to make a little more sense because that's what's going on more in the Nefesh Hachaim. The Nefesh Hachaim Chibur is understanding the importance of Torah and Tefillah, which is a way not only, it's not for the person himself, it's for the world. And by learning and davening for the world, this is an important thing. But it's more than that. This is an unbelievable yesod that who's saying this? Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Not a, if I would have found this in the Altus Labatka, you say, of course the Altus Labatka is going to say such a thing. Now, okay, I'm going further. So I come across a Gedolim book. I come across it many years ago, and then finally it comes out. This Gedolim book is what? So there was a Yid, Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh. Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh, to put in perspective who he is, he's a Talmud Muvik of Rabbi Yitzchak Volozhiner, and he's the father-in-law of one of my heroes, Rabbi Yosef Zechariah Stern, who we spoke about a whole episode, the Yalag episode about him. And so Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh is this giant Litvish Gadol, and maybe one day we'll talk all about him. But the point is, his other son-in-law, not Reb Yosef Zechariah Stern, but his other son-in-law, Mordechai Valak, writes a biography about his shver. He was also a Rav who was a tremendous Talmud Chacham who dies young, in his low 50s, I believe it was. And basically he writes by Tzvi Hirsch Hachaim Valk. He was the Rav of Pinsk, not a small little place. So he writes, after Mordechai Gimpel's Nifter, a book, a 40-50 page book about Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh. Fascinating material in this book. I saw mentioned the manuscript of it years and years ago in a book on Litta called Rabbi Seinu Shebegayla. And they have a picture of the Ksav Yad. I'm always wondering when's it going to come out. All of a sudden, Mechon Yerushalayim publishes the actual Ksav Yad in the front of a Sefer called Keser Kahuna of this Rav. So in there, I come across a page which is incredible, and it's interesting. It doesn't make the Tzushtel here, which is like this. He is a Talmud of Rabbi Volozhiner. His father was one of the Talmidim Muvhakim of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And he says that his father would always say over, and he heard him, and he himself would hear from Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner this concept that I'm saying from that Nefesh Hachaim, it's written in the Hagdam Nefesh Hachaim, where Yitzchak Volozhiner is saying that Kol Adam Loy La'atzei Niver Rak Loy La'achrin Kichol Hashim Tzibur Lases. This Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh becomes a tremendous Rav. This is what, and he has a whole thing how he writes it out. The Hafta Hashem Lekecha, Yishem Shemayim Esav Yodecha, Kol Pri Toitzos Hashem Saigim B'Havas Hashem, and a whole thing how it's written out. As Rav writes beautifully, how he would hear a Shver say this over from Reb Chaim Volozhiner, B'Shem is Shver, B'Shem Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner. This concept, which you think about it, it's pelvic. This is a Litvisha, the Torah world of the elite of the Litvisha Gedolim of the Talmidim of the Gra Beis Medrash. This is what they're saying over to giving it over. Then it goes even more fascinating. He says like this. that his shver was looking to point which gadol does he hold is doing this, that he's mamish, he's giving over everything for the klal, for the tzibur. So you think he's going to find some litvish gadol. So no. Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh says, which gadol does he think had this nakuda the most in the tekufa? The Chaim Sefer, which derech agav, this is just to show you a conversation I've had a few times about the yachas of Gedolei Lita to the Chaim Sefer. They had tremendous respect. This is a major marmakim for this. So he says the Chaim Sefer. Now, besides for his myridical learning, which he's not getting into over here, but the point is that he did everything for the generation. We know that he became kilu to make sure that what was happening, the priestess, he was a loichem for all the different milchamas. Anyone knows the history of the Chaim Sefer, this is one of the things that he gave over his time. Now, of course, we know the Chaim Sefer was giving shir yom v'layla. He answered thousands of tshuvas, and he was busy, but he managed to make sure to make it his business, keeping in mind, not because of Hachaim Volozhiner. He's just pointing out that this is a pashti yesod, that what Adam loyla atzmei nivra rak lahoyla achrina b'chol shimtze b'choychay lasis. Now he says the Chaim Sefer. I think he says this in the name of the Chaim Sefer, that the Chaim Sefer said, what's the difference between Chanoich and Avram Avinu? He says it's a famous yesod like this. Chanoich was a malach Hashem tzvakos, but he's only mentioned the Torah once. You know why? Because he is locked up in himself and he's dealing with himself. He's taking care of himself. Is it important? Yes. Avram Avinu is how many parshas is in the Torah is devoted to Avram Avinu? Endless. And we know Tliyei Tliyim Shel Shmuos, the Yafeh Sichasan Shel Avdei Avos, the Dirish and everything. We know Chanech was so holy and everything, but the point is no. That Avram Avinu gave over Mesorah Nefesh for Bnei Doiroi. He, as we know, even for the Goyim, everything for Sdaim, how much he did, and this is the Avram Avinu is the model for Klal Yisrael. And similarly, this is Reb Chaim Volozhin, Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin, the elite yeshiva of the Litvish world, is giving over this concept that that's what it's about. So now halachadik. What is this? Is it? Obviously, this requires halacha. There's a chiv of learning Torah. So if you look already in the Ruach Chaim from Chaim Volozhiner, where he has all arichos in the beginning of Avos about Chesed, fascinating material. He already tells too. Don't worry. You have to know the sugis of katan when it's a mitzvah sheyev shelasis haydei acherim being mevatel. If it's something that others cannot do. What means there's hilchas bittul Torah, which is obviously also an important thing, especially for the Litvish world, and not running to just okay. Now, later on comes the work from the Chafetz Chaim, the Havas Chesed, and the Havas Chesed, the Chibur. There's a lot devoted to the chashivos of the mitzvahs asay d'oraisa and the importance of Chesed. All this. So what my claim is, and this is what clicked for me, and what I'm saying is could be aleph based to someone if they're thinking about it. Could be I'm completely wrong. That R Chaim Kanievsky, this was his way of doing Chesed. Chaim Kanievsky sat and learned the whole day. He's not going around to do chesed in the standard ways, but he felt, how could he do chesed? By answering all these people. He says, Shvacha guy is coming to ask him a question. He'll give him an answer. And he knows, he was aware of who he was, that someone's going to get a letter from Chaim Kanievsky, geschmack, and it will inspire people. And you ask people, that many different people said, when I was a bacher, I wrote a bunch of letters to Chaim Kanievsky, and they look back all very happy about it. I was in contact with Chaim Kanievsky. He took the time to answer me. What better way to give over this Reb Chaim Volozhiner of what Kol Adam Loy La'atzmei Nivra Rak Lahoy La'achrini Kechol Sheyimtzu B'Koychay Lasis. We know Reb Chaim Kanievsky did this not only with his writing. He gave away a few hours a day to see people. Yes. How long did he speak to people? But it made people feel $1 million. He did it. Some people say, "What are you doing? You're not having conversations with the people. They're just coming. You're shaking your head, bua, all these different things." The answer is he held this is the nakuda, and I'm showing you is this is a nakuda who, nonetheless, where's it coming? Again, there's probably 1 million other makayers that say it, but this is a Volozhiner Mesorah. Chaim Volozhiner, as I said, who gave it out to Yitzchak Volozhiner. He would say it all the time. Gimpel Yafeh was saying it over, and this, as I said, even This is an akuda with the Chassam Sofer too. Okay, this is for today. This is just one of the aspects in the behind the scenes, so to speak. What I think one of the many lessons that we'll be able to take out from the tshuvas of Reb Chaim Kanievsky and Bechlal. When you look at Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he's the most documented person, hero of Gedolim that we have. The amount of pictures and videos that exist, I think we see he's giving so much time. He's always speaking with people. Yes, I agree. He's not having conversations with many of these people, but for some reason, it makes people feel good. He was willing to give away his time for this. And therefore, yeah, we did lose out these Seforim, but he held this is the Mesorah as Chaim Volozhiner. Okay. Obviously, there's some other Mahalchim and other Nakudas which we will discuss in the next few episodes.
Thank you. Yes, very important. Many Gedolim gave of their time in so many different ways, which you could say and think that it took away from their learning, their own growing, their own sharing Torah. But Reb Chaim Kanievsky's case here showing that perhaps it took away from actually writing Seforim, and a much Seforim that we are likely not going to see. Okay, would you like to share a new book?
Yeah, so I'll just share one sefer very briefly. Basically, one of the Gedolim of Yerushalayim that had a tremendous influence on none other than Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was Yid Reb David Baran. David Baran was a very interesting type of Yid, one of the old-time giants in Yerushalayim that most people never heard of. But he had a tremendous impact on Shlomo Zalman. Everywhere he was going, he was always thinking of different aspects of the halacha. And he had a big influence on Reb Shlomo Dublitsky somehow also, but Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was very into him. So I always heard about him, and many years ago, a booklet came out they collected a bunch of pieces that they were able to get about Reb David Baran. He didn't write too much. Okay, a little booklet comes out. Then slowly, two people, they decided to really go all in, and they come out and they make a fat book, hundreds of 600, 700 pages. They collect everything, and they do excellent work, a psakim of his on everything. And he was a Mordechai Yid. It's fascinating his interesting insights in the world of halacha, not the typical stuff, but also a lot of zugs that he would say. And as I said, he had a tremendous impact even on Gedolim in Yerushalayim, all different things. Just to mention one thing, because it relates to something we began today's episode. Because when the Mishnah Berurah came to Yerushalayim, he was blown away with it. He couldn't stop learning it. He was very into it. And he said, the Kol ha'olam lo herichu as a Sefer Mishnah Berurah kamay b'Yerushalayim. Because he was so interested, as I said, he was very into halacha. He was so interested in the Sefer. So the footnoters, as I said, Rosh Zalman was very into this. And so Shmuel Auerbach, they bring down, that Shmuel Auerbach told them that one of the Nakudas that Reb David Baran was very into was that the godless of the Mishnah Berurah that you see specifically in the Bir Halacha, which goes in the Nakuda I was bringing out in the beginning, that the Mishnah Berurah is not just a Likut Sefer, even though he calls himself a Likut Sefer. There's unbelievable things happening in the Mishnah Berurah. People have been writing articles recently, being Medaik and called Tag Shabbatag in the Mishnah Berurah, but even the Bir Halacha, how he sets up the Sugya and what he does is also incredible. So why am I mentioning this now? Is basically the Sefer came out 10, 15 years ago, and now they just redid it, sadly adding in a bunch more pages of material. So a person like me is stuck. You have to buy the new edition, Arich David it's called, because you have to have both. You never know. Maybe they took out stuff. You can't take the other one off your shelf because maybe they took out stuff in the first edition. And the new edition has 80 pages and more stuff from this Reb David Baran. What are you going to do? The life of an addict. Anyways, yeah, that's the story.
Interesting that you mentioned him. So for those who hung out in the Me'esh Arim Gula area for their learning, probably you know Rehov Baharan, right? That street that goes down from like Rehov Strauss area down into Me'esh Arim. But also the Shmuel Auerbach book, which is an incredible book in English, written by Rabbi Eitan Kobri. At the beginning of the book, he has some talks a little bit about David Baharan. It seems like the Auerbachs are very connected to him. He was like from the founders or original Toshavim in Shari Chesed.
Yeah. That, as a matter of fact, I think the first time I saw something about David Baran was reading a shmuz of Reb Shmuel Auerbach as a bacher. He said over something. I think that's how I first heard of Reb David Baran, and then once you start with Reb Shlomo Dublitsky and then back to Reb Shlomo Zalman, that's how it is. So I didn't know that he talks about it in the book. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I don't know if he mentions much about him, but that's where I came across.
You came across him, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking forward to the next one. Once again, anybody wants to be in touch with myself, shweidem@ou.org, or Rabbi Brut at eliezer.brut@gmail.com. Questions, comments, suggestions, criticisms, all welcome with a smile.